Well, your career in recent years has been an intriguing balance between the archival and a significant amount of brand new music. I'm curious, how do these two sides of your current output inform each other?
I've got a constant desire to do new things, to see what is in this strange thing called the brain, the mind, that we know is quite a complex uh, piece of human equipment, which at night time goes berserk and takes you all over the place in the strangest possible way. And you wake up thinking, what was that? And, one way of channeling that creatively is in doing music that doesn't really rely on you writing it, improvised music, in other words, and just seeing what comes out. And it's always been a bit like that. My desire to just play and not think about it and then see what happens. And because of the way technology has changed, I can now do that and put it down on some computer software and stuff, and then react to that. And I'll do it maybe 10 times, and then I'll just listen to it all and try to make sense of it and see if it does make any sense and what came out without intending to say, right, I'm going to do a jazzy piece, I'm going to do an ambient piece, I'm going to do this. I just play and then let it take me somewhere. And so that has translated into doing it live. Now, and the AM/PM latest project, which is what jazz musicians have been doing, since they invented jazz or jazz started. However, we're sort of doing it, but it's not jazz. It's sort of sounds, it's textures, but it uses a lot of the same sort of ideas, improvisation ideas, in the sense of listening to one another, having sort of musical conversations, if you like. But our palette is more like textural. And but that is sort of a lot more interesting to me at the moment than just being a slave to a song with a conventional structure, or serving the song, if you like, which I admire and love listening to in other people. I don't necessarily want to do that myself.
Yeah, has all this archival work you've been doing somehow reflected itself in some of your current work?
Occasionally, I would maybe, because of putting together the box set and stuff, having to listen to non-Roxy music stuff. So 801 Live, Quiet Sun, that area of instrumental music. I think I began feeling I need to sort of delve into that area again somehow. And which obviously we've done with AM/PM, and we're actually in the process of doing the second Quiet Sun album, which it comes like 53 years after the first one, which I think will be a big surprise for people. Obviously, I'm telling you, but the music, I think, will be quite a surprise.
Well, since you brought it up, and it is a surprise to me, tell me about the second Quiet Sun album and how this emerged again.
Well, obviously, I don't want to talk about it too much now because it'll come out this time next year. I mean, it's 80% done. And we just suddenly thought, we're all of a certain age, we're all about in our 70s. And we thought, what would it be like if we continued and did a follow-up album now, in the light of everything that's transpired? last 50 years. And then we started digging and delving around, and then found some stuff that was written in 1970. And so most of it is stuff that was written back then. It was down in notation form, but was never performed. And in fact, I had no idea what all those dots were, quite frankly. But and so we started with that, and it's evolved into what is coming now, which is well, I don't want to say too much about it now, because obviously the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So let's wait. But you know, once you've heard it, I think there'll be lots to talk about.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to that. I wanted to discuss your book, Revolution to Roxy. It begins with an exploration of your childhood, born of very dramatic societal unrest and upheaval. Describe the process of unearthing and reflecting that period in it.
Well, you know, you get to a certain age in your life where you think that you want to make sense of what happened. So, you know, when I started doing the book, I was, I don't know, 69, 70. And both my parents had died, and many years ago. And I began to regret that I hadn't asked them more questions. And people often have the same feeling, really. I wish I'd asked my parents about this and that, where we came from, and things like that. And that sort of led me on an exploration, really. And I then started discovering more and more things. And I'm still discovering, since I finished the book, I've discovered some incredibly new things about my grandfather on my father's side. That he, you know, because my father was illegitimate. Nobody really knew that. And then we discovered only in the last month that his father was actually a Neapolitan musician from a place called Cava di Terni. And his father was a musician as well, which was, you know, these are things that you sort of discover. Why do I do what I do? Is there any genetic reason? One of the things is that I have two Italian grandparents who are musicians. So, and then, you know, my mother starts teaching me guitar in Cuba in 1957. So that's more like nurture rather than nature. So I'm trying to make sense, not only for me, but also to leave a little story for my many grandchildren and a load of my cousins, because I have 70 in Colombia, where we all came from. So that was primarily the motivation for doing this memoir. And in between, I said, oh yes, I was in a rock and roll band. And so obviously I'm going to put stuff about that too. But the most interesting bit for me was about the family and tracing the origins. And I mean, the other thing which I discovered the other day, which is like a head job, is that I am related, bizarrely, to an artist called Sean Paul, Jamaica, whose real name is Francis Enriquez. And my grandmother's name was Enriquez. And then when I traced all the things down back to this pirate, a Jewish pirate, most famous Jewish pirate of the Caribbean, who's got his own Wikipedia page, I suddenly saw, this was about 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, it said, Sean Paul is related to this guy. So I'm in the process of getting in touch with Sean Paul and say, you're not going to believe this. There's this guy who's been in the band, an English band, for 50 years. I think we're related. Maybe we should do something together. I don't know. But I mean, so this process of discovery just goes on, and it's just so much fun, quite frankly. Yeah.
Well, as the book title, reveals, and as you read the first part of it, much discussion about revolution, war, insurrection, a lot of urgency, a lot of existential issues going on in your childhood. I'm curious if there are any specific philosophies or perspectives you accumulated during your childhood that ended up being sort of reflected in your life as a musician in terms of urgency, in terms of wanting to capture, the zeitgeist.
Well, if you have been part of the Cuban Revolution in the sense that I was there when it happened, and then you're at a certain age, and Che Guevara becomes like a folk hero, and you start reading about Marxism and socialism and stuff like that, and I became like an expert on everything to do with Cuba and the Cuban Revolution while I was at school, and that chimed with what was going on in the 60s in London in terms of revolution and change. And people were looking to all these different philosophies and different huge blossoming of thought patterns. And, as my friend who wrote the book Revolution in the Head, Ian MacDonald, who's part of my upbringing, a friend and everything, it really, the 60s, there was a revolution in the head in many, many senses of the word. My being informed by that sort of knowledge of the ideas of Marxism, and we're not talking about what happened later with Stalin and all that kind of stuff, but the pure sort of idea chimed with a lot of the sort of, if you like, hippie philosophy of the 60s, which came out of the West Coast and things like that, which chimed with us all, and especially musicians and everything about peace and love. I know it sounds a bit drippy now, but it stayed with me and stayed. And the thing about togetherness and working together with people, I took into bands and things like that, and other musicians, and just bringing people together from different countries and different styles of music and finding a common thread. So, it is all tied up, if you like, in what happened to me in 1957 till I joined Roxy, really, in terms of my brain and how I viewed life and history and all that kind of stuff.
Well, we're currently living through a period of rather dramatic societal upheaval across the world. What are your thoughts about the value of music in the current environment?
Well, obviously, in moments of despair, personal despair at what the hell is going on in the world, when you just think of the world's gone to the hell in a handcuff. I think, what is my function? What can I do to help? I'm not a politician. I'm not a activist. I've been on a few marches, but all I can do is try and help soothe people's anxiety with music and somehow deliver some sort of meditative usefulness to the music that I do. And that's the best I can do, really. Because, you're trying to, I'm not chasing single chart success or anything. I'm just doing music that helps. And I know that music is good for your mental health. I know, having been brought up in South America, that despite all the troubles and trials and tribulations, people can dance, and they dance away they forget for a bit. It gives them relief, and that's one of the great things about Latin music, is the rhythm and the groove and sentimentality as well. It's almost like, you know, they have their own equivalent of the blues with boleros and woe is me, you know, singing stuff, which is cathartic, if you like. And so I know if I needed to justify me sitting in this room doing some new music, which I've just been doing, it helps me, and I hope that you know, has some resonance with people. It's not about, and the thing about me, it's not necessarily about technique. It's never been about technique. I decided when I was 17 or 18 that I wanted to do music for the whole of my life, gently, slowly, enjoy it and learn a lot. And there's so many things I still want to learn how to do, which I'll probably never be able to do, but I wanted to spread music out, you know, and luckily through a few of the bands that I've done or produced, they produced some income to allow me to continue to just about keep doing that.
What are some of the things you'd like to still explore and learn about?
Well, I've always wanted to be able to play rumba flamenca. And I have tried so hard, and it should be in me. It should be in me, that groove. And, you know, when I produce Spanish bands and things like you know, even the guitarists in there, they can all do that as well as rock. And so I said, right, I'm going to sit you down. I'm going to film what you do with your right hand, and I'm going to study it, and I'm going to learn how to do it. I still can't do it properly, and I could just sail off into the sunset if I had that groove playing. I could see myself on a boat or something, sailing away, just playing. So that is one thing. Obviously, I'm in awe of people who have technical prowess, and especially with classical guitar and the ability to play the mixture, flamenco style, if you like. I mean, but that is not something you can just pick up and put down. It's a lifestyle. You have to commit yourself to it totally. So I'm too much of a sort of scattergun type person to be able to have done that. But yeah, so there's all sorts of things.
Well, you mentioned the very lavish 50 Years of Music box set from last year. What story do you feel this musical journey tells in aggregate for you?
Well, it's just a soundtrack to my musical life outside of Roxy music, really. And what it shows is that, yeah, they're called solo albums, but they're not really solo albums. They're just an excuse to work with friends and not have to be controlled by some A&R department anywhere, and just do whatever you want. And the record company, to start with, would have to put it out, and then I eventually formed my own record company in 1989, so I didn't have to even ask permission from a record company. But you know, at the beginning of Roxy, when people started almost immediately doing solo albums, Bryan Ferry, Andy Mackay, Eno, and I worked on quite a few of them, almost like 2 years after we started, all this started. And so I put my hand up and said, can I do it one? And they said, oh yes, go on, go away, just do it, yeah. And so I did two straight away, the Quiet Sun album and Diamond Head. And it was just, that was then, you know, I got together Robert Wyatt, who was one of my heroes, and I'd known since I was 16. I got together John Wetton on bass, a good friend, Paul Thompson, and eventually Simon Phillips, and all the, just Bill McCormick brothers. And we just had fun. And really the box set is just putting together all the different styles and attempts to do new music. over a 50-year period. Of course, it didn't sell anything.
Well, one thing I feel the box vividly illustrates is the elasticity of rock and pop and the potential of stretching boundaries, as far as they can go. What are your thoughts about that as it relates to your solo material?
Well, yeah, as the other interesting thing about this whole 50 years of music was that as technology changed, I was very much up on technology. And right from the beginning, me and Eno bonded very much in the sense that we were both keen users of any new gear that came out. So when they invented 4-track cassette recording, when they invented the ability to multi-track with a Revox tape recorder with all these little special editions back in the 70s, and when there was, at a time when there was only one fuzz box and one wah-wah pedal, then you had to make up ways of creating weird and wonderful sounds, organic sounds, by stretching a tape round a broom handle and then putting a little sticky tape on it as it went over the capstan, and just experimenting. And one thing leads to another. I mean, the whole thing has been, if you start right from the beginning, it's a series of yes or no's. Do I do this? Yes. In that case, do I do that next? No. Do I do this? Yes. And so a series of yes and no's throughout the whole of this period. So that really is your critical ability, your craftsmanship of having a musical palette to draw on, which is really about, which I tell, if anyone wants any advice and stuff, I especially young kids learning, so listen to as much and many different kinds of music as possible, because you will then have all this stuff to dip into when you are, continuing analogy, painting your picture. You have all these different colors to use, and that will, your particular combination creates your USP, your unique point of view, and helps you to express yourself as an individual, rather than, you see, I've always been not against music colleges and music schools, because that's primarily, to start with, to do with classical music and playing the great masters and things like that. But I could also see a disadvantage of playing dots. Invariably, a lot of fantastic classical musicians who play Mozart or Vivaldi or whatever can't improvise, which is like just, it's a head job for me, because I just can't imagine why they can't do that, because they've got this incredible technique which could be utilized in such a interesting new kind of way, but it's too, they've been trained to do it in a certain way. And that's why this whole improvisational thing, which really influenced me in the mid-60s, the West Coast musicians, the Grateful Dead, and then Velvet Underground, the other side, the yin and yang stuff, and then all the Miles Davis, yeah, big time, everything. When I read that John McLaughlin turned up to the session in the silent way, he had no idea what he was going to play or anything, and he didn't get any instructions from. And that kind of way of working is sort of what I've sort of used as a template, really. Put a whole bunch of stuff and then sift through it, panning for gold, put things together in different ways. And of course, he was doing that, in the 60s and stuff, and putting together different takes, but like cutting up tape and great engineers. So I'd love that kind of ambition.
Did anything surprise you during the process of listening back to 50 years of output?
Um, some of it, I thought, oh, that's good. But then a lot of it, I thought, oh, that's really average. Or like, why did I do that? But, you know, I was collaborating pretty much on all of it, apart from the instrumentals, with my friends, you know, whether it was Eno, John Wetton, Robert Wyatt, Tim Finn, Neil Finn, but just so, you know, most of this are to do with songs. You know, that's why, you know, a couple of years ago after the end of the Roxy farewell tour, I sort of said farewell to songs, really. And putting the box set together meant, right, I've done that. That's what I did before. I'm looking forward. I don't really want to look backwards too much at all. So, yeah.
Well, let's look forward and shift to the present day. You mentioned the AM/PM Soho live album early on in our conversation. Talk about the journey from the AM/PM studio album to the concerts and the evolution of the material between the two releases.
Okay. So, like many musicians during COVID, I was stuck in this room. I'm in the outside in the garden here, in this little construct, and I had this a keyboard, one guitar, one amp, one thing. So I want to do some just like music, whatever turns up, turns up. So, and then I thought, what's Andy doing? Mackay. Okay, he was in a place called Brighton on the seaside. So I rang him up and said, what are you doing? So I'm doing nothing. I said, well, you should be doing music. Well, we got to do this. I'm going to do these tracks and I'm going to send them to you. Do whatever you like, send it back to me, and we'll go backwards and forwards. So that's how. So I just improvised the backing tracks and just improvised all sorts of stuff. Sent it to him, and then COVID finished, and then there was this chance to do a farewell Roxy tour. We went on the farewell Roxy tour. We finished that, and immediately we finished that, we then said, let's take what we did, that improvised stuff, and go in the studio, finish it off, get Paul Thompson. We were all, you know, had played and rehearsed for ages, so we had great chops, you know. We were up to speed with playing. We wanted to capture that. So we did that, mixed it and everything. And then listened to it, and I thought, I can't describe what this music is. What is it? And because it's improvised, it was changed and changed quite a lot, even within each track. I thought, this is going to be difficult for people to review it, because most writers of reviews are literary people who are very happy to have songs with lyrics because they get their teeth in. But when it comes to talking about instrumental music, there's a problem, because how do you describe, unless, you know, especially if it doesn't have any resonance for you, or if you like it, how do you have to describe it in a sort of abstract, floaty sort of way? And a lot of the reviews said, we can tell you what it's not, but it's very difficult to tell you what it is. It's a bit of this and it's a bit of that, but it's not obviously a bit of that and that. So I thought, okay, I like this. I like this kind of sort of reaction. And then Andy said, why don't we do some live gigs? And I was very worried. I said, I think it's going to be a disaster. I don't know how, I can't learn what I do. I've got no idea. It's too complicated for me. I just got no idea. He said, no, let's do it. I said, really, can we not do it? He said, no, let's do it. And let's make it a small thing. The last time we played together, the O2, 20,000 people. Let's do it for 75 people, 3 nights in a screening theatre in Soho in London. A screening theatre where there's a big screen, it's a screening theatre, and it's got 7.1 surround sound. So let's try and make a sort of, I thought, okay, yeah. In the 60s, Andy and Eno used to do these arts lab, sort of psychedelic sort of happenings type sort of things with music and stuff. I thought, okay, it's a bit like that. I'll make some videos, we'll project them onto us. We'll play this stuff, which will take a minimal amount from each track off the 24 track, not 24, the Pro Tools, and use that as a basis for improvising. So every time we play, it will be different, and we'll just be in the moment and see what happens. So we had virtually no rehearsal. It was technically an amazing summation, culmination of 50 years of tech, the way it's evolved, because even the mixing guy, who's much more than a mixing guy, is a musician as well, was triggering stuff from the desk. He was sending it around the 7.1 speakers. We were reacting to what was being played, and we were listening to each other. And you know, I didn't put any of the talking in between the tracks on the album, but I did say to the audience when the first track finished, I said, "What was that?" And we sort of laughed, and they sort of joined in the whole jeopardy of what was happening, because we had no idea what it was going to be like, and it worked really well. And you can hear it on the actual album. There is space. You can hear this, and sounds appear that don't sound like guitar or anything, because we created a little collective, if you like, of musicians. And for instance, Lucas, who had been my guitar roadie on the tour, he's a guitarist, a Spanish guy. He also, I said, you take my pedal board and you put it on a table and you do what Eno used to do, treating my guitars. And I will play something, you treat it. When I hear what you've done, I will react to that. And then Andy will react to me, or whatever, come in, or Paul Thompson. And so it's quite a complex series interaction, but dealing in sounds, sound textures and groove, rather than blowing in an improvisational sort of technical way. So that, combined with the light show aspect, I think created this sort of immersive type of scenario, which, you know, we'd love to go and play, but it's, as it turns out, there's 7 people involved, and the cost of taking something like that and playing in a small venue makes it a disaster financially, and just lose everything if we do. But so still working on trying to find a way to make it happen. But that was exciting to me. And what seems to be very interesting is I've just read Eno's new album with BT Wolf, and everything that he's saying sounds exactly like what me and Andy and Paul are doing. And in fact, Bryan Ferry did an album with a speech sort of artist, conceptual kind of artist this year. And it seems he's doing a similar type of improvisational, strange sort of thing. So what gives me great pleasure is that all the original members of Roxy this year have brought out stuff. 5 of the 6, because unfortunately one of them died, the bass player years ago, are still doing what was the original mission statement, which basically to have an avant rock group. And when I was on stage, I suddenly thought, what the hell is this music? And I suddenly thought, actually, this is avant rock. I was just trying to find here somewhere. Oh yeah, someone sent me a little PDF plastic thing of the ad that I answered to join Roxy Music. And what it says is the perfect guitarist for avant rock group. And I've completely forgotten. And it says original, creative, adaptable, melodic, fast, slow, elegant, witty, scary, stable, tricky. And that, I thought, well, that actually does describe the music that we're doing now. And unbeknownst to me, it must have sort of seeped into my brain. But so I call what we're doing avant rock, which is rock in the sense that Paul Thompson, if he wants to like lash out, whose hero was John Bonham, will do that. And we provide some sort of, not avant-garde, but heading in that direction kind of music and just present it in an attractive fashion.
Well, you mentioned the AM/PM intersections with the 2022 Roxy Music Tour. Talk about using AM/PM as a vehicle to reinterpret Roxy songs like Out of the Blue, Love is a Drug, and Tara, as you did on the live album.
Yeah, well, even though it was meant to be a sort of improvised scenario, I thought it might be too much for the punters who came to listen to 90 minutes of like ambient or whatever it turned out to be. So I thought we'd better give them something. Being a sort of, having been in showbiz, quite frankly, you need to give the last 20 minutes, okay, let's give them something they know, but let's change the arrangement on it. Obviously, it's sung by a girl, and we've got amazing violinist Anna Phoebe, who was in Roxy very briefly as well. So let's like kick some ass and just the last 20 minutes, yeah, you've put up with us for like an hour of this kind of wishy-washy kind of avant music. We'll give you some Roxy stuff and also a couple of things from that riff I did with that was used by Jay-Z and Kanye West and stuff like that, and just show you that we can rock as well, you know. Bit of fun.
Well, how do you look back at the 2022 Roxy Music Tour in retrospect?
I'm very, it was the first time ever that we were able to present Roxy's music in the iconography sort of context because of the screens we had. So that was the first time ever. So I was very pleased about that. The very last one showed a lot of artwork and imagery and content, visual context for the show. So it worked on sort of two levels. But you know, it wasn't easy to do because we'd had COVID. You know, Brian wasn't particularly well on the tour, and you know, so we hadn't played concerts for ages, so years and years and years. So it was a big undertaking. We didn't have a manager, we didn't have anything. You know, Brian lives near here, and he just rang up at Christmas and fancy coming around for a cup of tea. I said, fancy doing a farewell tour? I said, sure, let's do it. You know, and they said, oh, hang on, we haven't got a manager, we haven't got a infrastructure, we haven't got an office, you know. So we had all that kind of stuff. So, but I'm so glad we did it. You know, we filmed it and we recorded. None of that's ever come out. You know, they could come out, should come out at some point. Need to like get on with it. But because we're all too busy trying to do new things, we're sort of, there's this fear we're going to sort of run out of time. Anyway, you know, it's there, and it's a sort of legacy thing, you know. So yeah, I was very happy And then, you know, at the end of the O2 gig, you know, me and Andy said, you know what, let's stop. Let's not do any more. So in fact, we only did 12 gigs in the whole world. Yeah. And one was in San Francisco.
Indeed, I was there. Yeah.
Oh, you were there. Okay, great.
Yeah, lovely gig. Lovely gig. Yeah, the visual element was fascinating. As an addition.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
another key creative vector of yours currently is your recent work with Tim Finn. And of course, that relationship goes all the way back to Listen Now and K-Scope, as well as your work as a producer for Split Ends. Discuss the reemergence of that partnership and how the two albums you did in recent years reflect the distance traveled.
Ever since I saw them in 1975, I think 75 or 76, it was a first Roxy tour of Australia, went to Australia, long journey, flopped on the bed, turned on the television, there they were, Split Ends, they were called. Just come over from New Zealand, it was their first TV appearance. I thought it wasn't what I was expecting. I was just like absolutely blown away. And then they happened to be the support band the next day at the gig. So I sort of stuck my head after we watched them on the side of the stage, then stuck my head around the door of their dressing room and said, "Oh, you guys, like, amazing. Anything I can do to help?" You know, they didn't have an album at that point. I walked on and a little head popped out and said, "Will you produce our album?" I thought, yeah, dream on. I'm going back to London. How's that? I've got no idea how's that going to happen. So they did record their album in Australia, but they came to England and we re-recorded it with some new tracks as well. And that actually is 50 years old and it's coming out in a couple of months' time. And Tim Finn, he was over here a couple of weeks ago and I hadn't seen him physically for 6 years, just on Zoom and stuff. And we had a lovely time chatting about all those times back then. And we've been friends ever since. They're just such great people. Their talent is off the scale. Both Tim and Neil, they've just got it. As singers, as songwriters, as lyricists. And, you know, I'm helping promote their box set because I believe in it so much. You know, I listened to the Dolby Atmos version and I was just amazed how good they were. I don't think I really appreciated the time I produced them, how good they were. And the arrangements, and of course, now with the internet and everything, you can dig back and find out a lot about, much more about the background. At the time, I had no idea that they'd actually been playing together in different formations for like 4 or 5 years before I even saw them. No wonder they're so bloody good. So, you know, at the time, I was, you know, it was one of my first productions after co-producing with Eno and John Cale and stuff. And I had my mind on the 801 Live project, which they came to. I didn't realize that Tim had been there, the guys had been at the gig, Queen Elizabeth Hall. So we had that bond going back. And then when Roxy Music got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, on the same evening, I can't believe my brain's got so many things now. Anyway, Fleetwood Mac they were all sitting there because she was getting an award on her own. And by that point, Neil Finn was in Fleetwood Mac, doing Lindsey Buckingham's parts. And so we went back to he invited us back to the party afterwards, their party. And I had a picture taken. I sent it to Tim in New Zealand. I said, "Look who I bumped into last night." And he said, "Oh, well, I've been meaning to get in touch because we're going to do some weird versions of tracks based on the first album. Would you play guitar on them? So that's how we re-established after many, many years of, because they, as you said, that they'd played on a couple of my solo albums, Listen Now and Casco, in the 70s. And so we've been in touch all over period. And then actually during COVID as well, he was sitting at home and he just sent me an email, say, have you got any Latin grooves or anything I can write to music? And I said, well, you've come to the right place. I've got a whole computer's worth here of stuff. I'd send him stuff, and literally the next morning he would send back something with a vocal on and lyrics. And I was just like, this is a joke. Hang on, how can you possibly do that? Have you got a book somewhere full of lyrics and you just adapt? And every morning I'd walk around the field here, you know, because we weren't allowed to go out there, listening to this stuff, and he'd just send overnight because of the time change between Auckland and London. And it was amazing. And I you know, realized again how amazingly credible he is. And he hadn't worked in that way before. Now that was the way that we worked with Roxy. And most people don't work that way, where you do all the music first and then a singer or lyricist will try and write a top line over what you've done. And I'd say 95% of all the Roxy tracks were done that way, totally done that way. They weren't sitting down and written like the Beatles did, write stuff. Or like, quite frankly, Neil or Tim. You know, they would, 4 seasons in one day, you know, that's, you know, it wasn't like that for Roxy. So, and to tell you the truth, it wasn't like that for Bowie until Eno came along and did the Roxy method of writing stuff. You create this musical context world that's sort of different that this person can inhabit. So Tim, I said, I can change stuff if you want. He said, don't change anything. I'm going to just work on what you sent me. And he would do that. You know, in the end, we did about 20 tracks over 2 albums. And I was sitting here thinking, I'm going to send him stuff that he'll never be able to write a top line over, something really like, just, you know, like AM, PM sort of thing. I'll send it to him. It would come back with something. So that's how those songs went. And it was very, very enjoyable and helped get through the whole sort of COVID period as well.
Well, I wanted to go back a little bit to your extraordinary Viva La Taranta releases from 2015 and 2016. Tell me how you arrived at the dramatic scope they explore and the creative process that was involved in realizing them.
Okay, so most people haven't heard of pizzica music. It's a particular music from the Puglia region of Italy. I had to learn completely about it. These 2 guys came to me, and one of them used to handle Brian Eno, and said, would you be interested in being the musical director, maestro concertatore of this event, which is a free concert in August, and it has about 200,000 people. And you have to, it's all based on this particular kind of music called pizzica music, but you have to bring a new flavor to it, sort of reinvented by each musical director every year. And so foolishly, I said, oh, hang on. Does Eno not want to do it? Is it too difficult for Eno or something? They said, oh, no, we think you should do it. So I said yes. And then, you know, it was 6 months of having to deal with what they call a popular orchestra, which is all these sort of instruments from like bagpipes with pig's bladders and tamborellos, and you know, so they're one-man drum kits, basically big. They're a bit like the Irish, and I had to learn. But also, this is based on the field recordings of Alan Lomax. So you have to go back to listen to the field. You know, Alan Lomax, you know, who went around America and discovered all the blues artists and chronicled them, and then came to the UK and did all the folk artists. He was sent by the BBC to Puglia in the early 50s to chronicle the field recording singing of people. They used to grow a lot of tobacco in the fields there. This kind of pizzico music was based on the cult of Dionysus. It goes back 2,000 years, and it was evolved. I mean, this sounds like a sort of, I'm making this up, but it evolved out of a sort of trying to exorcise demons out of people who have been bitten by tarantulas in the cotton, in the tobacco fields. And so this sort of 6/8 rhythm, which played on a percussive instrument, this tamborello, was meant to sort of build up into some sort of frenzied sort of rhythmic groove, which will exorcise. I don't know whether it really did, to tell the truth, but this music then was converged with, if you know what happened in the history in that area, was like invaded by every Tom, Dick, and Harry, like the Turks, the Greeks, the French, the Moroccans. You know, everybody invaded. So all the influences, it's like a melting pot, was added into this 6/8 tarantella beat. So my job, plus there's two kinds of mafias down there, which I didn't really appreciate. So there's all sorts of levels of intensity going on. There were political elections going on. The whole thing was quite political, and that I then decided to invite, I could invite guests. So I had Tony Allen on drums. I had bass player from The Clash. I had a Colombian singer called Andrea Echeverri from a band called Los Terciopelados, who I produced. I had a Cuban guy playing tres, the special Cuban instrument. I had I had the most famous rock musician from Italy, Ligabue. And they all had to sing in the dialect from down there to make it even more difficult, Salentino. And you've got to produce a concert that's shown live on Rai Uno in front of 200,000 people who want to dance and want to. It was the most extraordinary, and this was in between co-producing the David Gilmour album, Rattle That Long. So I had every month had to go to Italy to rehearse the orchestra, and 18 dancers dancing the famous Taranta. I mean, I'm just exhausted talking about it, quite frankly. I don't know how it happened. It was great, and I came out alive. There were a few dodgy moments when I was escorted somewhere where I didn't want to go by the mayor of a town, but I lived to, and so I thought, I'm going to record this because I spent all this time doing this. So yeah, there was 3 albums worth of pizzica music. And all sorts of people have been the maestro concertadores, you know, over the years. And yeah, it was like nothing else.
Now you followed up that record with another monster expansive collaboration called the Liberation Project, Songs That Made Us Free. How do you look back at that one, and what are your thoughts about the relevance it still has all these years later?
That all started because years ago, I was invited to be part of a South African band that was going to play at WOMAD. And it was called the African Gypsies. But funny enough, it was, well, the main mover on that was a South African guy who's of Italian descent. But we had Ray Perry, who's the guy who helped Paul Simon do Graceland. And we had an amazing bass player from Mozambique. And we had some incredible musicians from South Africa. And so I did that WOMAD tour with them. And we did Las Palmas, and we did South Africa, we did Australia and New Zealand. And through that, I became very friendly with people in Durban. And I kept being invited back to work on different projects. And this particular, the Liberation Project, was something that was put on to commemorate Mandela Day in it was in Cape Town, actually. But so, and then it traveled. We ended up doing a tour in Italy, and we had Mandela's daughter would come on and talk before, and it was more like supposedly funded by the South African music arts department stuff, but it was all a bit flaky, I'm afraid. But the concert in one of the main concerts there was fabulous, and they invited people from all over the world to celebrate it. Yeah, so I mean that was just another great opportunity to play with very different musicians with a different groove, and again I learned so much and just appreciated how there are just so many amazing musicians from different countries. Because I think really, you know, the 60s and a lot of the 70s, it was so European and American centric everywhere. Until really the Buena Vista Social Club was a big success, and Peter Gabriel said, oh, you know, there's this thing called world music, which everyone then hated the name world music. But it just showed that every country has some amazing, unique music that they express themselves through. And it now combines elements from all different countries. And, you know, as like Rock en Español did, I was one of the first people to become a Brit, sort of South American Brit, to realize, who understood Spanish and could understand that people singing in Argentina about their own issues was just brilliant. And Colombia is just brilliant, and Puerto Rico is just brilliant, and it's different, and Venezuela is different, and Brazil is different. And when you know the language, you appreciate their art and their craftsmanship. And those guys who I produced, you know, in the beginning of the 90s and stuff, are still winning Latin Grammys. This month, one of the main guys is like the top Grammy. The other one is, you know, that's Enrique Bunbury, and then there's Draco Rosa from Puerto Rico, and Fito Páez from Argentina. It's just a joy to see how successful they have become in the last 30 years. And they were only about 20 at the time when I met them. So it's been you know, it's part of my whole thing of music as a vehicle to bring people together.
Well, I've got a couple of ancient history questions, and I wanted to discuss 801 Live from 1976 briefly. Speaking of bringing a group of extraordinary people together, that record had such serious ambitions, both musically and technically speaking. What are some key memories that stand out for you when you think about that period?
Well, me, Eno, Bill McCormick, and his brother Ian McCormick, also known as Ian MacDonald, we went to a little cottage in Wales and we cooked up this idea of doing this project, which would only last, it's like a sort of, if you can imagine, an art project of Eno's. It would only last, by definition, 6 weeks. We'd play 3 concerts. We'd get people who loved technique and people who hated technique together. And through our joint music and a couple of covers, we would attempt to bring this all together in one package. So we had, an 18-year-old credible drummer, Simon Phillips, who's now just total legend. We had a technically brilliant Francis Monkman, who had been in Curved Air and played with John Williams. We had a blues guitarist who won the Melody Maker competition as solo artist of the year, who had been supporting Bowie with him just with his slide guitar. And we had Eno, anti-technique, and me in between the two, straddling the two. And we went into the rehearsal room for 3 weeks, and then we just went and played only 3 gigs. Actually, there was meant to be 4, 5, but they got cancelled. We did one tiny little pub, we did the Reading Festival, and we did the one we recorded at the Elizabeth Hall, Queen Elizabeth Hall. That's become 801 Live. We decided to use the Island Mobile, but not to do what most people do with a live album, which is to use a lot of ambience mics out the front. We close mic'd everything. And so that made it much more like a live studio album, if you like. We mixed all this music together, and by some miracle, it worked, and then it was gone. And literally after that, went off to work with Bowie. Virtually never saw him again. Not quite true, but it was one of those things. It was a great thing that was designed to only last 6 weeks, and then poof, in a smoke, it disappeared.
All right, my other archival question for you is I've seen very little discussion about the Wet and Manzanera album over the decades. Tell me how that project came together and, what you and John sought to accomplish under the auspices of the very corporate Geffen umbrella of the era.
Well, me and John have been friends, since we were stablemates from 1972 onwards. King Crimson and Roxy, same management. Got to know him very well. Good holidays together. When the opportunities came up to work, when he wasn't working on all his other things, we continued. And then eventually I had a studio, and we said, we saw each other a lot. Said, well, why don't we just do an album together, songs? Because he wanted to do an album of songs, not of sort of instrumental or tricky music and stuff. And he was in, it was the post-Asia phase, and he had a lot of success with Asia at last after all these years, and then it had gone horribly wrong. And he had been drinking a lot. And so I said, John, okay, let's do this album. We'll write the songs as we go along. Unfortunately, he would only last a couple of hours before he would just like fall asleep. So it was a bit difficult to do, but we were trying to be commercial and to use his beautiful voice, quite frankly. and his harmonies. And we had, I think, who played? Alan White plays some drums. Carl Palmer plays some drums. I can't remember who else was on it. I'd have to. It caught me out here because I'd have to look at the thing. But we were sort of pleased with it. And I had my manager was the manager of Pink Floyd, and his manager was the manager of Yes. And they went to play it to Geffen, despite the fact that Armit Ertegun said he would have it. There was some contractual reason that John was stuck with Geffen, but I think because he, and I may be totally wrong, but I think he, in some interview in America, he had said some bad things about David Geffen when he was like drunk or something. I don't know. And I think Geffen said, this guy's never going to work again, type thing. So they went to the meeting, and I said, John, don't go to the meeting in LA. And he went and waited outside while the big dogs went in to do the deal, or went to a restaurant, and it all ended very, very badly at this restaurant thing. And then I had this phone call from John. It's so rock and roll. It's all gone horribly wrong, And basically, it's going to be with Geffen, but they're going to kill it. So it never really stood a chance, really. But I thought, it had a couple of like singles on it that in that kind of fashion that could have done well in America, and so yeah, it's been buried for ages.
Did you remain in touch with John?
So right up until the couple of weeks before he passed away, yeah, I told him. By then he'd given up drinking and everything. He had his cancer treatment and stuff. And I said, John, I just want to tell you, you're an amazing bass player, amazing singer. He was incredible. And I knew about him before he joined Crimson, because when he was in Family, he was one of the few people in England, if there were anyone else I've never heard, who could do that sort of Sly and the Family Stone slapping on with the bass, but also, regardless of what the sound was on stage, he could sing in tune and play the bass at the same time. It was incredible. He had incredible talent. I'm probably biased because he was a good friend, but no, he really was a joy to play with.
All right, just a couple more questions for you. You've been part of every music industry format and shift that's occurred for countless decades. What are your thoughts about where the industry has landed today?
The whole paradigm of the industry has changed. It is in a state of flux. Nobody knows what to do to get anywhere. Young people, I have young musicians come to my studio and stuff for advice, and I say, I listen to their stuff, and I said, this sounds great. What more do you have to do? I mean, it's all become very democratized, which is great. It means there's thousands of people trying to do it. When I started in Roxy, there were very few people in London trying to start. You could stand out, and there was very few media outlets, and there was no internet, obviously, and word of mouth counted for things. And it's terribly hard now for musicians coming up to earn the basic living, to pay their rent, to do it. Most young musicians around London have to do about 5 different jobs to have the privilege of being a musician. It's very difficult now. And, I mean, I listen to Spotify. I love the fact that I can listen to stuff. I don't have to go out and buy the album and stuff like that. However, you need to pay the musicians a proper rate. And it's like controlled by a series of non-disclosure contracts between the multinationals and Spotify and the streamers, and we're all screwed basically. Where's the revolution? It's political. The only way to sort it out is by legislation. And there's so many vested interests, like so many things in society. There's so many greedy people, but if one looks historically at the whole record business, since they invented record companies at the beginning of the 18th, 20th century, unfortunately, the narrative is, let's pull one over on the musicians. Let's actually get their copyrights and screw them over. I mean, there have been, and there are some genuine people who love music and music business, but to actually effect change, there's so many vested interests that, quite frankly, you'd have to, it's political. It's legislation, it's in Congress, it's in the Houses of Parliament, yeah. We know what the issues are. We all love music for all different occasions. We want music occasions. We need to pay the musicians more. Just the normal basic rate needs to be more. That's my summation of where we are at the moment.
All right. Well, my last question goes back to the beginning of our conversation, where you touched a little bit on your priorities at the moment. But let me get you to explore a little more deeply about your personal drive to remain so creative, active, and moving forward at this point in your life.
My physical mental state, I find it helpful, just like I find going swimming helpful and going for a walk in the countryside and looking at nature helpful. I find doing music helpful. So it's self-help, really. And I have a way of getting it out using the state of technology to people. So hopefully it would have some resonance for other people. But it's just helpful.
All right. Well, that is all I had for you today.
Thanks, Andy.